was once a husband and wife who had long wished for a child. The couple had a little window at the back of their house from which a large garden could be seen. It was full of beautiful flowers and herbs. However, it was surrounded by a high wall, and no one ever dared go into it because it belonged to a fearful enchantress. One day, the wife was standing at the window and looking down into the garden when she saw a bed of leafy green plants known as Rapunzel. She was suddenly overcome with a strong craving for the green leaves. This desire increased every day, and she began to pine away for it so much that she looked pale and miserable. Her husband grew alarmed and asked his wife what was ailing her. "Oh," she replied, "I have such a craving for the Rapunzel that is in the garden behind our house. I feel I shall surely die if I can't have any." The man loved his wife and didn't want to see her suffer. So at twilight, he climbed over the wall into the garden of the enchantress, quickly grabbed a handful of Rapunzel, and took it back home. The wife immediately made a salad of it, but it tasted so good to her that the next day she longed for it even more than before. The husband knew that if he was to have any rest, he would need to go back into the garden. So in the gloom of evening he returned, but when he jumped over the wall this time, he was shocked to find the enchantress standing before him. "How dare you trespass into my garden and steal my plants? You will suffer like the thief you are."
"Please have mercy on me," he cried. "I only did it out of necessity. My wife saw your Rapunzel from our window and might have died if she could not get some to eat." The enchantress decided to take pity on the man. She would allow him to take more Rapunzel from her garden, but on one condition. "You must give me your firstborn child. I will raise it as my own. It will be well treated." The man was so frightened he consented. So when the wife gave birth a few months later, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name of Rapunzel, and took it away with her. Rapunzel grew into a beautiful young woman. When she was but a teenager, the enchantress shut her into a tower which lay in a forest and had no stairs or doors. But at the top there was a little window, and when the enchantress wanted to go in, she walked to the base of the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel had magnificent long hair which was as fine as spun gold. When she heard the voice of the enchantress, she would lean out of the window and let her braided hair drop below, allowing the enchantress to climb up it like a rope. After a year or two, it came to pass that the king's son was riding through the forest when he passed by the tower and heard a song that was so charming that he stood still and listened. This was Rapunzel, who in her solitude passed her time by singing. The king's son wished to climb up to her, but he could not find a door to the tower. He rode home, but the singing had touched his heart so deeply that he returned to the forest every day to listen to it. One day, when he was in the forest, he saw the enchantress come up to the tower and cry, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel let down the braids of her hair and the enchantress climbed up to her. The prince decided to try this himself. So the next day, when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." The hair was immediately let down, and the prince climbed up. At first, Rapunzel was frightened to see a man before her, as the only other person she had ever known was the enchantress. But the prince began talking to her like a friend, and soon charmed Rapunzel into losing her fear. She saw how young and handsome he was, so when he asked her if she would marry him, she said yes. But she didn't have a way to leave the tower, so she told the prince to return with a bit of rope. Once she had enough, she would be able to make a ladder with it, and she and the prince would go away together. They agreed that he would return every evening until then, since the enchantress only came by day. At first, the enchantress did not notice anything, but one day Rapunzel made the mistake of asking her why the prince was so much easier to pull up than she was. "What? You wicked child!" the enchantress cried. "I thought I had isolated you from the world, and yet you have deceived me." In her rage, she seized a pair of scissors, clutched Rapunzel's beautiful tresses, and cut off her braid. Then she banished Rapunzel into the desert, where she would have to live in grief and misery. When the king's son returned that evening and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," the enchantress took the braid that she had cut off,
fastened it to a hook on the window, and let it drop down to the prince. When he ascended, instead of finding his dearest Rapunzel, he found the enchantress, who glared at him with wickedness. "You are too late. Your dearest Rapunzel is lost to you, and you will never see her again." The prince was beside himself with pain, and in his despair he leapt from the tower. Though he escaped with his life, the thorns into which he fell pierced his eyes. He wandered blindly throughout the forest, eating nothing but roots and berries, and weeping over the loss of his wife. He wandered in misery for years, until he came to the desert where Rapunzel, with the twins to which she had given birth, lived in wretchedness. Hearing a familiar voice, he went towards it. When he approached, Rapunzel recognized him and fell on his neck and wept. 2 of her tears wetted his eyes, and sight was suddenly returned. He led her to his kingdom, where he was joyfully received, and they lived for a long time afterwards, happy and contented.